Playoffs. You want to talk playoffs? Yes, we're talking playoffs today on Locked On Bengals.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. I'm Jake Liscow. He's James Rapien. Together, we are Locked On Bengals on the Locked On Podcast Network, covering your team every day on YouTube and everywhere you get your podcast. Shout out to the everydayers, those of you who don't miss an episode of Locked On Bengals. We appreciate you so very much, in addition to all of you who make us your first listen. And if you're new to the show, maybe you're curious about those Bengals playoff scenarios and that slim path that they face to make it into the playoffs. Well, we're going to break it all down today, in addition to getting to what we think you can buy down the stretch here. The Bengals are getting that bounce against some bad teams down the stretch. At the same time, we're actually talking about that slim path to the playoffs. So what are we buying from this team down the stretch? But James, we start with the playoff situation today in an episode brought to you by Gametime, where you can buy tickets and save $20 on your first ticket in the app with promo code LOCKEDON NFL. And if you're talking about playoff tickets, well, the Bengals have a lot of work to do to get to that point.
Yeah, they do. They do. Sorry, I'll stop going. Playoffs starting now. They have a lot of work to do, and it starts with winning 3 straight. And they've already won 2 straight, and they haven't won 3 straight all season long. They've only won back-to-back games twice. So even though they've won back-to-back, Jake, if it just starts right now, they have to do something over the next 3 weeks that they haven't done all year. And so that alone is a big ask, right? Now, you could say, oh, well, Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase. And so you could sell yourself on that they beat the Browns and then they handle business against the Broncos. And then who knows what Pittsburgh's playing for. All right, fine. So let's just say you get that done. Then there's 4 different teams you're paying attention to. To me, it's really 3. You need the Dolphins to lose 1. You need the Colts to lose 1. And then I'm paying attention to the Denver Broncos, who play Thursday night. They play the Chargers. And you either need the Broncos to lose out or the Chargers to lose out and go 0-3 down the stretch. The reason why I would be focused on the Broncos and on Thursday night rooting for the Chargers is if you're the Bengals, you play the Broncos. You can control that element. And so if the Broncos lose Thursday night, you beat the Browns on Sunday, well, then at least for 1 more week, your playoff hopes will be alive, and you play the team that is in your way. So a lot needs to happen. You're asking good teams, well-coached teams to lose out, teams like the Dolphins to lose to a game that they probably should lose in the 49ers, but this coming week. And then you need the Titans to potentially step up and knock off the Colts. There's just a lot of things that have to go the Bengals' way.
Yeah, when you look at the opponents for these teams, that's where things get dicey. I mean, and in the first place, we're talking about, okay, the Bengals need to win out. And you mentioned their difficulties in winning consecutive games this year. We've obviously watched all the games this season. Everyone listening to this show has probably seen, or watching the show has probably seen all the games this season. And you know that it's been hard for the Bengals to win this year. They've got a bunch of 1-score losses in the AFC in particular that came down to the wire or were excruciating losses. And we've covered all of them. We've been through all of those. So not only do the Bengals need to win out, but you also need one of the Broncos or Chargers to lose out. Like those 2 opposite outcomes that the Bengals need, not to mention needing the Dolphins or Colts to lose 1. So you look at the opponents of these teams that they have to deal with down the stretch and where those losses could come from, and try to talk yourself into the possibility, because you've seen this happen before. If the Bengals do end up making it, it's unlikely, but not unheard of in NFL history. But the Dolphins having to play San Francisco, at Cleveland, at New York. So they got 1 division game there with the Jets. Mm-hmm. The Cleveland Browns are in disarray. They're spiraling. The Bengals also have to beat the Browns. But the Dolphins have to go to Cleveland, where it's a little bit harder to play, generally, historically. I don't know about this year. And then the San Francisco 49ers, who, similar to the Bengals, had all these expectations this season and are also 6-8. The Colts, Need the Colts to lose one. They lost to the Broncos on Sunday, so that helps a little bit. There's obviously some give and take there with the Broncos, but the Colts play the Tennessee Titans at home. They go to the New York Giants. And they play the Jacksonville Jaguars at home. It doesn't get much softer than that. So even with all these other things we're talking about, you need the Colts to lose one of those games that, I mean, the Colts are an erratic team as well, but you probably wouldn't expect them to lose. The Broncos play the Chargers, the Bengals, which the Bengals can control to some degree. That's in Cincinnati, and the Kansas City Chiefs, who may or may not have anything to play for in that final game of the season as well. And Patrick Mahomes dealing with an injury, who knows how they handle that. You look at the Chargers, again, there's some easy games down the stretch here for the Chargers. This is why James isn't really watching the Chargers as closely. They play Denver, which is a divisional game that certainly matters for both teams. Then they play the New England Patriots and the Las Vegas Raiders.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, you don't think Jim Harbaugh is winning one of those games? Maybe with you at quarterback. I think that's honestly probably with you at quarterback, with the Raiders quarterback situation. It's tough. And so you need the Chargers this week. Chargers this week and a win over. Here's how I look at it, because there's so many things that need to happen and it's overwhelming. So from a Bengals fan standpoint, root for the Chargers Thursday night, and root for whoever you want, but I think that this is the logical approach. Root for the Chargers Thursday night and hope the Bengals handle business on Sunday. And then maybe the Colts stub their toe, or the Dolphins. And I think the Dolphins this week is the toughest, because the 49ers really have to need a miracle if they're going to do anything. But the 49ers have been bad this year. So on paper, that's a tough one, but not so much. Not that I think the Dolphins are good, but I don't think people around the league think the Bengals are necessarily a good team either. So you're going to need help from some of these bad teams. And the other element here is you really need, and it's weird with Patrick Mahomes' injury, but if the Chiefs go 1-1 over the next two, you need that Week 18 game to matter for the Kansas City Chiefs. If the Broncos lose Thursday, and then you beat them somehow next week and you beat the Browns, you need the Chiefs to be playing for the 1 seed in Week 18. Because if they are, well, yeah, there's reason to believe they can beat the Broncos. Of course. Is Carson Wentz doing it? Is a bunch of Chiefs backups doing it if they know that they can rest Mahomes because they have the number 1 seed locked up? That's the dynamic here, where it's like, all right, you need the Chiefs to go 1-1 over the next two at best, and the Bills to win and keep pressure on the Chiefs. They have that tiebreaker, so that Week 18 Chiefs game matters. So there's a lot of things. And that's why I simplify it to Thursday night, root for the Chargers. And then obviously the Bengals need to handle business against the Browns on Sunday.
And in case you're curious about the Chiefs' schedule for their last 3 games, Houston Texans at home, at Pittsburgh, and then at Denver to finish. So you need the Pittsburgh Steelers and Houston Texans to win one of those 2 games.
The Steelers could win.
The Texans could win too. I mean,
yeah. Carson wins.
Carson, you've seen Andy Reid do it with some backup
no doubt
before, so we'll see what happens there. Like you're talking about Carson Wentz against the Broncos, and I'm like, yeah, I could see that, sure.
And they haven't been winning yeah, you're right. That's true. And so there's a scenario, but they haven't been winning with Mahomes going off, obviously. They've been winning with defense and running the ball and all of the things you do with a backup anyways. So it's tough. It's tough. Anytime I break this down, Jake, I think of Week 1.
Yep.
And in the moment, we said Week 1 would cost them.
Yep.
And it would really hurt this time of year. And guess what it does? I think about the Chargers game. Like we wouldn't be mentioning the Chargers the same way had they handled business there. Obviously, you mentioned all the other. I mean, there's so many. They're 2-7 and 1-score games. But those are the two. It's like, oh my, like if you had just beat the Chargers and beat Jacoby Brissett, just different, so much different. And instead you need about 800 things to happen, and they need to do something that they haven't done. I mean, entering this stretch, they had 4 wins. We're asking them to win 5 in a row to have a chance. It's just a lot to ask when we kind of know what this team is.
And even if they were to win all those games, what level of belief would there be in the playoffs, given the way the season has gone? That's the other element.
Yeah.
that's interesting to me. In addition to a quick update on where the Bengals will be picking on the other side of things, if you're not interested in the playoffs, if you're interested in draft order, we'll make sure we cover those couple topics to wrap this conversation up coming up next.
Today's show is brought to you by Gametime. Gametime is the app you need right now because Gametime, what's going to make life easier on you? Whether you want to watch Bengals Browns on Sunday, maybe you're thinking, all right, that Broncos game is really going to matter. Or maybe you plan on going to Pittsburgh for what could be a really ultra important game, or you're a big NBA fan, or you want to go to the college football playoff. The point is Gametime is going to make it easy to get into all of these live events. Any live event that you're thinking about going to, check out the Gametime app. They have this Gametime Picks feature that makes getting tickets even easier. It filters out all the fluff and only shows you incredible deals on great seats. They also have panoramic views from your seat, so you know exactly what your view is going to be like with the tickets that you order, all in pricing as well. All you have to do is download the Gametime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDON NFL, LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime.
This episode of Locked On Bengals is sponsored by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And whether it's NFL action or any of those other sports James just talked about, FanDuel is there for you with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place, whether you're looking at the Cincinnati Bengals opening at 7-point favorites at home against the Cleveland Browns this week, or anything else, or you're looking in the middle of a game. You get a hunch. You can see the latest stats, the live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. So you can check out FanDuel.com to join today to get started. Those $150 in bonus bets are there for you if you win your first $5 bet. That's at FanDuel.com, official sportsbook partner of the NFL.
Draft position, Jake. Draft position. And the Bengals, there was some talk a few weeks ago like, oh, well, if they lose out, and I think you and I both knew they were just too good to do that, especially with the teams on their schedule, like a Dallas team or like the Titans, who are, I mean, they're just awful, by the way. I mean, over 24 hours removed from the game now. I'm like, man, that is a bad football team. But you win a couple of games, and now draft position wise, they're moving down and getting a worse draft pick as their playoff chances have went up by like half a percentage. They're at like 2.1% right now to make the postseason, by the way, for those wondering.
Oh, interesting. I'd seen that number as high as like 5%, maybe, from different models. There are a bunch of different models out there that have different percentages. The ESPN model, the PFF model, the New York Times model.
Yeah, I think it's under 6% everywhere that I've seen, but I've seen like 2.1. I've seen like 3. You mentioned 5. Still not good.
Maybe that's errant recall on my part to come up with the 5.
No, I think you're right.
I thought that was the ESPN model that I saw this morning. Anyway, 2 things left on this conversation. One of those is the draft order. One of those is even if they make the playoffs, and that'll be a bit of a quicker conversation that ties into what are we buying, or maybe not a quicker conversation. Maybe that's just a lead into the transition to what are we buying down the stretch here. But when we look at the draft order on our
I'm buying Christmas presents. That's what I'm buying.
Tankathon.
Credit card's getting charged.
Got our handy tankathon.com/NFL here as James is looking at his Christmas buying list. I'm looking at the NFL Amazon draft order here.
Long. Oh my
God.
I'm going to ask Joe for some money.
The very bad teams in the NFL continue to lose. And that doesn't help at all. All the bad teams, like the top 9 or 10 teams, the Bengals aren't getting to the top 10. That's like the Carolinas of the world, the Giants of the world, the Cleveland Browns of the world, the New York Jets of the world. I don't think the Bengals are getting into that conversation. I don't think those teams are going on a big run. I think that we know those teams are very bad. The Bengals currently would be picking 13th if the season were to end today. With Miami and Indianapolis losing, those 2 teams jumped the Bengals in the draft order to 11 and 12 respectively. Dallas winning this week keeps Dallas 1 pick behind the Bengals. And we talked about San Francisco a little bit earlier, also at 6 and 8, would be picking 15th right now, 2 picks behind the Bengals with a comparatively extremely strong strength of schedule. Atlanta on a 4-game losing streak hasn't played their game yet this week at 6-7. So we don't know how that will impact things yet, but that's the idea of where the Bengals are right now. They dropped from 11-13 with that win in Tennessee if the season were to end today.
Yeah, and we knew this was again, I expected it. Now, do I expect them to go 3-0 over the next 3? No. But even if they had lost these last 2, they weren't going to jump into this top 5 range. There's just too many bad teams, to your point. And so it is what it is. Now, what I said 2 weeks ago is what I stand by. Either go all in one way or I'll go all in the other. Don't half-ass it now. And half-assing it would be like finishing 8-9. If you're going to flirt with this, with being a playoff team, get to 9-8, get a winning record for a 4th straight year, and let's put the pressure on these other teams to handle business and try to get into the playoffs. Don't go 7-10 or 8-9 and pick 16th and never have a real chance at the playoffs and still have a middle of the pack draft pick. I'd rather pick 19th and handle business and put yourself in position to possibly make the playoffs, if that makes sense. So we'll see. But now they've already cost themselves, as you said, a top 10 pick. Fine. Now finish the job here is kind of my mindset. Whether it's realistic or not is different. But, and I, of course, want the higher pick. And how heavy we'll be on the draft. Our everydayers know that. But as of right now, it's like, all right, well, at least give yourself a chance.
And that's certainly what the team is thinking. When Joe Burrow is playing, there's a 0% chance that they're thinking about the draft position. After last year, we saw them not really thinking about their draft position without Joe Burrow playing. December football, where it becomes a topic for me, is if they do drop one of their last 2 games, they're eliminated from the playoffs mathematically. Then the decision, you have to make these hard decisions around, well, our offensive line is really beat up. We don't know what's going on with Alex Kappa. We saw him go to the blue 10 a couple times in that game against Tennessee. Cody Ford missed a game with an illness. Hopefully he's not dealing with a severe illness and he gets back, because there was a step down there. But you've got an increasingly injured offensive line. You've got Joe Burrow dealing with a knee injury this week, and he's out there playing anyway, looking mostly mobile enough. Probably affected him a little bit in that game.
Agreed.
So then you have to make a hard choice potentially at some point. But then you have these competing goals, like Joe Burrow's having an awesome season. He's going to want to complete his season. He's going to want to put all that on tape. He's talked about that numerous times. Jamar Chase chasing the Triple Crown. They're going to want to keep that goal going down the stretch as well. And so while from a high level, from a big picture perspective, this season, if they're mathematically eliminated, you would want to preserve those guys, make sure that they get to next season as healthy as possible. The Bengals probably aren't going to have that approach anyway. So you might as well try to win all the games, because that's what they're going to do. Now, easier said than done. You don't just get to pick, lose 3, win 3. We don't get to just make that choice today and then that magically happens. And they don't get to do that either. They still have to play the games, but you can see where these points of friction come up when you're talking about draft position, individual player goals, and then everything around this team that we've been talking about for the last few weeks, about decisions around the coaching staff and trying to figure out what players are part of the team's future, are all pieces that they need to figure out too. And after that Pittsburgh game, we talked about this bounce, this late season bounce, and we've started to see it against backup quarterbacks 2 weeks in a row, where the defense has done enough or has been opportunistic enough and the offense is still doing enough. And then the question comes up of, well, what are you buying? Even if this team were to make it to the playoffs, I think these topics do tie together. How much confidence would there even be with the way they've been playing? And given the answer to that question, whatever your answer to that question is, probably informs what the Bengals should do with some of these questions we've been talking about on the coaching staff and for players that may or may not be part of the team's future. We'll get into those questions to finish the show coming up next.
It's that time of the year. That's right. The college football playoff is back, and with the newly expanded 12-team format, it's guaranteed to be bigger and better than ever, bringing you all of the hard-hitting and high-flying excitement that you love. TNT Sports' coverage of the college football playoff begins on December 21st, starting with the college football playoff kickoff show presented by AT&T at 11 a.m. Eastern, leading into our first matchup. The Southern Methodist University Mustangs battling the Penn State Nittany Lions at noon. Then the Clemson Tigers look to upset the Texas Longhorns in a showdown at 4 p.m. Eastern. Don't miss a moment of the action. Watch the college football playoff presented by Allstate live on TNT, True TV, TBS, and Max. Jake, as far as their chances, if they got into the playoffs, I would default to, and of all these teams we talked about, so Miami, the Chargers, the Broncos, and the Colts, the scariest team for any of these playoff teams, and I get it, people are like, oh, well, Buffalo will they will drop 1,000 points on that Bengals defense. If I'm Buffalo, if I'm Kansas City, if I'm insert whatever playoff team that would get that, I don't want to deal with Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. I just don't. Because I do think that of all of them in a one-and-done scenario, not worried about Bo Nix. Not worried about that. Yeah, they're a good defense in Denver, but it's not. I think the Chargers, they're lacking weapons, even though they got some good players and good pieces. It's, to me, that the Bengals would be the scariest team. But would I be confident? Would I be looking at the New Orleans flight schedule from CVG for the Super Bowl? No, I would not. To your point, I also think that the Bengals would be the scariest of the group because in a one and done scenario, they could go hang 21 on you in the first quarter and it could just be a weird game. So I would never want to see Joe Burrow in a one and done situation. At the same time, I wouldn't be bullish on this team to make a legitimate run because we know they're flawed, and those flaws aren't going to completely change regardless of what happens over the final 3 weeks.
Yeah, that's the underlying point is we have seen this team win the games were crucially important. We've seen them lose a bunch of games that we called must-win games and a bunch of, like I said earlier in this show, excruciating and heartbreaking ways. They would have somewhat impressive wins down the stretch if they were to make the playoffs. Denver is a team that has been much better than expected this year. Pittsburgh on the road, if they're playing their starters, would be a win against a team that's been really good this year, especially on the defensive side of the ball. But then you get to the playoffs, and while I agree that the Bengals would probably be the scariest team for any of these potential opponents in the first round, whether that's Buffalo or Kansas City or whoever it might end up being in that hypothetical, because of Joe Burrow, because of the offense, I think those teams would also look at the Bengals and say, hey, they haven't beaten a team with a winning record until the last 2 games in this scenario all year. Mm-hmm. And maybe Pittsburgh's resting their starters to get there. Maybe they've only beaten the Denver Broncos and Bo Nix for a team with a winning record, a team that's exceeding expectations. And you look at the defense and the results they've had on that side of the ball that aren't really getting better despite all the turnovers they had yesterday on Sunday. Yes, you don't want to deal with Joe Burrow in the playoffs. I agree with that. But you're also probably looking at the matchup and feeling like we can handle that defense. We can do enough. Joe's going to have to be perfect. That's how it's been for them all year. And that's how they've lost some of these really close games because he's been, 98% good instead of 100% good, And so it still feels like such an uphill battle for the Bengals that, we're back to talking about the playoffs this week. But it almost feels to me like we still shouldn't be back to talking about the playoffs this week because they're still so much the same team, despite all of the good things that are happening on the offensive side of the ball with Joe Burrow and those stars.
Yeah, to me, it's get it to next week. Like a week from now, if we're saying, man, if you beat Denver, then I'll start to think about it. Like actually think about the playoffs. Like we went through the scenarios and I just said that wouldn't be scared. And it's a flawed football team and they're 6-8. They haven't won 3 straight games this year. They have to do that. And if they do that and they get a little help on Thursday night, then maybe I can open up that door. Right now, the playoff door is still shut. And beating the Cowboys and the Titans isn't changing that. Next week, could they change that a little bit? Where, like, if that Denver game means something, well, then okay. And by means something, it's like, all right, well, if you hand Denver its second loss in a row and they need to lose 3 straight and you win your 4th straight game, well, now we're talking. And so we'll see if it gets to that point. Until it gets there, I really can't sell myself on, oh, well, Geno Stone this defense making plays, or you got to show me a bit more. Go force three or 4 turnovers against a bad Browns offense on Sunday. Go do that and earn a little, build a little equity. I'm a big equity guy, and the equity was long gone. So we'll see if they can earn a bit of it and sweep Cleveland for the first time since 2017. That's kind of where I'm at. It's like, all right, well, beat the Browns and see maybe if the Chargers can help you out on Thursday.
And then we might be talking about a meaningful football game in December.
Yeah.
Meaningful is stretching a little bit there, but it would be meaningful. That's like a legitimately meaningful game. It's not that much of a stretch. Yes, the Bengals would need more help, but there's potentially a meaningful game there. And there's all the other stuff we talked about too, all the other help that they need. But then the question becomes, like, are we buying anything down the stretch? And the final 3 games will tell us a little bit more, but I go back to that conversation we had when people were ready to get rid of Lou Anarumo and the defensive staff in that losing streak that they had before the Dallas Cowboys game, and the conversation we had where I said the only reason that I could see to do this move now is so that they don't get swept up in the late season bounce, because it's coming or has a chance to arrive. And they've played some bad teams, and they get another bad team this week. They still gave up 20 to the Cowboys, 27 to the Titans. I know there were some turnovers involved, especially against the Titans, a garbage time touchdown there, but better performances against bad quarterbacks. And we've seen that from this Bengals defense all year. The question is, how much do we buy? And what's going on with the Bengals offensive line is the other question for me. Like, can they get some guys back or not? Alex Kappa wasn't good in that game, but his replacement was Andrew Stuber for the 4 snaps that he did not play toward the end of that game.
Stuber.
And there's a lot of talk about Matt Lee obviously getting into the lineup, but the Bengals went with Andrew Stuber in that spot, probably because they see Matt Lee as a center only plus an extra lineman in certain run sets. But Geno Stone had a really good game, especially for those of you that look at PFF grades. And McKinley Jackson had an awesome play to force that fumble. And Miles Murphy, their pass rush win rates going around for him, had the highest pass rush grade on the team, according to PFF, in that game. So then we've got these questions about some of these players. Cam Taylor-Britt with the late season bounce, where he's put together a few solid games in a row. And all of these questions around players on the defensive side of the ball that will or will not be part of the future, and Lou Anarumo's future, are any of these things changing with these games down the stretch?
The answer as of now is probably no, right? Like, Geno Stone's future is really dependent on who replaces Lou, assuming it goes that route. But, and here's the but, defense plays well over the final 3 weeks. You look up and you're 9-8, winning record for a 4th straight year. Maybe you sneak into the play. Like, if I'm Lou, that's my mindset. If I'm this defense, that's my mindset. Because if, whether you're in a contract year like Mike Hilton, who played well on Sunday, or you're Geno Stone trying to earn year 2 of his contract, or you're Jordan Battle, or you're Miles Murphy or McKinley, you're playing well, obviously helps the team now, but it's an audition for the next coach, or it's going to help keep Lou here. Like, either way, you need to play well, like, because they've been so bad or they're so young that they haven't shown what we need to see. And so we'll see if these guys can continue to do it, because they were charted for 9 missed tackles from PFF. They, just basic stuff against a bad team that they didn't necessarily do. And you're going to have to do that over the next 3 weeks. Cleveland is just not a fun game for them ever. Like, I don't think they just roll Cleveland this week. We'll see. Maybe they do. But they couldn't roll Tennessee, and they had 6 turnovers, right? So we'll see.
And the Browns apparently are reluctant right now to name a starting quarterback. So we might be seeing another quarterback change
man, that quarterback shirt, that quarterback jersey just gets longer and longer and longer.
Has Dorian Thompson-Robinson started for them ever before? He might already be on. Do they put the names back on if they start and then get benched and then start again?
He has not started this year. I don't believe.
Did he start one last year when Watson was suspended?
I'm checking now. He did. Yeah, he did start last year. You're right. He started 3 games last year. He was 1-2, completed 53% of his passes.
Yeah.
Was 11 for 24 against the Bengals when he for 82 yards and 2 picks.
But Kevin Stefanski,
I would much rather see DTR than Jameis Winston, to be honest.
A lot of variance to Jameis Winston, but a lot of turnover proclivity as well, which is where the Bengals have shown up, at least this week. So it'll be interesting nonetheless. We will continue to cover these topics. We didn't get very deep into the how much are we buying about the late season performances. I wonder if Lou can do enough. I wonder. Just with the way the season went, I wonder how recency bias, as we discussed, will impact decision-making down the stretch, the way things are continuing.
Maybe we can discuss that on tomorrow's show.
Yeah, there's more time to talk about it. And I think that it becomes more relevant after some of the games down the stretch. Like, I don't think the full picture exists until, obviously, the end of the season. But that's going to do it for this episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. Thanks for listening. Hoo day, and have a good one.